Today, guys, people who are watching, we're going to be doing like a production sort of panel slash discussion. We've got a bunch of topics I'm excited to talk with the team about. We're going to be going over live event production versus online production. We'll be talking about organization, planning, execution for events. We'll talk about different tools. How do they compare? Is it easy to use? How did you learn? Your ideal staff amount. We'll talk about collegiate events versus pro events versus community events. Another topic I think we'll talk about is what resources do you think colleges are lacking when it comes to production and lands and stuff like that. And then we'll obviously do a Q&A at the end. But to get started, we'll sort of go through some introductions. I'll introduce myself. I'm Natter. I've been in esports for 4 or 5 years. I was a professional Overwatch coach for a while. I'm a content creator for Atlanta Reign. I do cybersecurity or security at Riot Games. I am not super smart like all these people with me about production. They know a lot more. So I'm very curious to hear their thoughts and go through these topics with them. But yeah, Reef, you want to go first? Then maybe Pizza, Solomon, sign
Yeah.
ups.
I'm Rafe. Been working in esports for about the same as you, really, 5 years probably from now. Did some community tournaments, ended up on contenders for Overwatch contenders, and branched out into different esports. I'm studying esports production at university as well, so a
Okay.
lot of connections and networking goes through there as well. But yeah, done Blast CS:GO this past month, going next month again. So yeah,
That's actually really cool. I think I'm probably gonna ask a few questions about like how that is like studying in university and stuff, like production and stuff, and
yeah.
how much that relates to actually like live events, especially when we talk about the collegiate stuff. Pizza, you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Pizza or Bailey. I work on Overwatch League for as one of our project managers. I used to, or I guess I've also been in esports around the same time, about 5 to 6 years. I used to be an amateur coach, and then I moved into doing admin work for on the tournament side for Overwatch contenders. I worked for Elo Hell Esports that some of you all might be familiar with, and then I moved into another esports production company where for about like 2 years or so, I did a lot of both like tournament organization and like event management. And then I moved into more of a project manager role, which kind of brought me into Overwatch League at Blizzard, and that's where I am today.
Hi, I'm Solomon. I'm the director of BPL, which is basically a community tournament, but now we're getting big enough to be a production group on its own. And I've been a producer in esports for, well, I don't know, it's shorter than these guys probably, but probably like 3, 4 years now. I'm also a content specialist at AOE Creative, so I work on the YouTube for the Overwatch League.
Signups.
Right on. Okay, yeah. So, live event technical production project manager, esports properly in 2018 through university development and esports competitions, but with a background in live event production, about 20 years in concert production.
Awesome. Okay. So why don't we just get straight into it? Let's sort of talk about live event production versus online production. Online production. There's like a lot of things I think we can go into this. Pete has written up some cool bullet points and talking points, such as like cost, revenue, venue, staffing, dealing with COVID, inclusivity, and like reach. But does anyone have any thoughts on like live event production versus online production?
There's a major cost differential between the two.
Okay.
First off,
So how would you what goes into that cost differential? Would you say?
personnel primarily.
Mhm.
The equipment is less so a cost factor than the personnel in
Mhm.
that production. So really identifying the key players that are going to need to be on site, in person, touching things and moving it from point A to point B versus the remote operators
Mhm.
really stacks into that cost. And so for me, from my point of view, I would look at a live event being more expensive than just strictly streamed.
Okay. Anyone else's thoughts?
I can add on to that a bit. Yeah, I would say for my so at my previous company, we did a lot of like production for a bunch of different esports, like all across like Rocket League, Tekken, For Honor, all this kind of random esports. And I would say one of our big cost discussions with all of our clients was like pretty much everyone I think wants to do a live event if possible. It's always just cooler. There's more things going on, but with a remote show, like especially with just personnel, like I think a big part of this that people don't realize is that like the cost for participants and managing them is so high and the venue is so high. And I think those two are like the biggest cost drivers. And when you're remote, everyone's at home, so you don't have to worry about that. And then you don't have to use the venue cost. So a lot of it is like I think, especially for a production, it's like where do you want to spend your money and budget? And a lot of times it's like if you want to have an in-person show, those two costs really, really drive up the whole thing.
Makes sense. Yeah, I can definitely. I think venue is quite tricky, and obviously getting people for it too, especially if it's in like another location. Then you maybe try and find people local, or you have to like move people because I'm assuming it's a pay for like people's like travel as well, right?
Yeah, I would say depending on I think the level of production you do, but like um, certain events, like the participants will expect that you comp travel and with T&E or with
Mhm.
your travel, and that cost is very exponential. I think the cost of doing T&E for like an Overwatch League event, for example,
Mhm.
can be the cost of an entire remote production for a week or a weekend.
What?
Yep.
Holy moly! That's
Yeah, it's just because
actually wild to hear.
yeah, when you have so many people participating, the cost just adds up. Like if one team goes, it's their team and their staff, and that those numbers go up pretty high.
That's what you're saying. That's very interesting. Reef, any thoughts on this?
Mostly about like the feeling you get at LANs and remote productions. Like I've done both of them now. I've done LANs like Insomnia, like big LANs in the UK.
Mhm.
But I've also done other events remotely. It's always nice to be at a LAN. The feeling is surreal. Like it doesn't matter if like I worked Lisbon Blast show, like a really big arena show, and it was absolutely impeccable. Like being in person and like the feeling you get. But I do appreciate it when we do actually do remote stuff because you can be like, you're done with work, you can log off, make some food, chill on the couch, just chill out for a bit. While when you do remote shows, you have to travel. As an example, in August, I had to travel to Copenhagen, figure my way out to the hotel, set in the hotel, and other issues that I encountered with the hotel as well that happened. It's just like it can get stressful. It's really nice though. You get everything prepaid, of course, most of the time. Depends on the production houses, really. And yeah, that's basically like I enjoy LANs, but working from home is also pretty cool.
Solomon, any your thoughts on that? Yeah.
Yeah, I've never done an esports LAN yet. It's definitely something on my bucket list. I definitely want to go. I definitely want to work one at some point. I've done other stuff like I've worked in as a theater technician and I've worked in like nightclubs and stuff. So the IRL having a full crowd and loud music and everything is just so different to working on it in your bedroom. They're both good, but there's just nothing better than being in person.
Yeah, I like having. I went to my first actual LAN event, believe it or not, literally at the LCS arena because it's like a walkover from where I work, like literally just walking over a street, and it was insane just to see all the lighting effect, the crowd, like all like just everything. It was just so cool. So yeah, I also want to eventually host one of my own LAN events, just because being in LA, I think there's a lot of demand for that as well. So I remember the long time ago there was like I think it was a local host LAN in LA, and it was like really popular. So fingers crossed, maybe in the future, next year I'll look to try and do something. But definitely sounds expensive, so I'll have to save up.
Yeah, something else I want to add is I think like a big aspect of LANs is that it helps you close your season or give people something that they're like competing for because I think something that esports the whole struggle with during COVID was like you'll have your whole season that's all remote and then your finals also remote and it's just kind of it doesn't feel as cool. Like if you have the whole season's remote but then you have this big final event LAN, the big showstopper, everyone comes on, you have all these eyes, cool viewing experience. I think that helps make your season so impactful.
Yeah.
But especially during COVID, a lot of esports leagues had to go all online, which really pulled the punch out of a lot of their like final broadcasts and such.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Anyone else have some like adding thoughts to sort of
Yeah.
like live event? Yeah. Good.
Yeah, so like as an example, we came out of COVID in the UK, and they had the first ever British esports championship. It's basically like a tournament for collegiate UK,
Mhm.
and all of the students came in for the finals for all the final games. You had games like Overwatch, Valorant, Rocket League, and a few other games. And like just hearing about the experience that those students had there as well was just very different. Like they were all really excited. You also saw some crying when they won. It's uh, it's different to them just being at home, sitting at home.
Yeah.
Their parents get to come along with them as well, understand more about esports. There were tutors around explaining to parents like
Wait.
where this can go, how like you can feed into this and stuff. It's like I feel like LAN events also help even grassroots just get more excitement and yeah, help feed bigger tournaments in the future.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I went to a sort of like an esports invitational that was hosted by Boise State for Esports Tower, and it was just like really cool to like meet people. Like I met Armor, who I like worked with for a really long time, and I got to see her like face to face, and I met a bunch of other people too, like players that I've worked with, and also just like meeting like people from like university directors and talking to them and their experiences, and meeting Dr. Haskell, who's like a really cool guy, and sort of just like yeah, just like going around and like seeing people. I think it was like just really cool to see like just people in person. I'm also really hoping Owl finals are in LA so I could like easily go. My fingers are crossed for that. But yeah, so I think LAN events definitely give that. I think it's also interesting from the parents' point of view. Um, Coming from my mom has never fully understood esports. I think to this day she has not, and I think she'll only maybe understand it if she sees something like physical like that. And even then, I'm still not sure. I think then she'll still be whacking on my head. Go get your master's degree. Go get your master's degree, or go get some certification. But I still think that like it's definitely something visual and it's like really appealing. I am curious, like, what your thoughts on what happened with like COVID and sort of like how that really affected LAN events and how that maybe affected like budgeting actually. Like, do you guys think that because of COVID, I know it affected a lot of sponsors and stuff, but because LAN events are inherently more expensive, do you think there was a rise in budgeting so people were going to spend more on prize pools for like online events and stuff? If anyone has thoughts on that?
I could jump into that one.
Mhm.
So, I would say my last company, which was called Eastar Studios, based in Vegas. As I said, we had production. We're doing a lot of different things. A lot of companies, especially on the higher end, like their budgets for live events just got shoved onto remote events or
Mhm.
online events during the pandemic.
Mhm.
So, like, a lot of these productions just had giant prize pools or more money because, as I said, live events are so expensive
Yeah.
that they could just move it online and the cost is like fractional. I wouldn't say it's like less than like a third, but it's very significant. So that a lot of that money got pushed there. And especially once COVID opened up, you started to see a lot of these really huge budget events that just because all the money was saved up because it wasn't like disappeared, it was just like held up, if that makes sense.
Interesting. Okay. Anyone else thoughts on this?
Well, yeah, it killed the in-person stuff and pushed everything online for us on the production side of things. And, we turned our attention to what does remote business look like?
Mhm. Okay. Yeah, I think it's definitely an interesting topic. Anyone else's thoughts on sort of like live event production versus online production?
Well, I will say that,
Mhm.
yeah, it costs more, but what you get out of it is that experience for
Mhm.
the parent or for the person who may not know what esports is. And for me, that's kind of my passion. My passion comes from the live event experiential place. And the idea that you're going to have a family going to go see their son or daughter compete in a event, and that's something that hasn't been available necessarily in the esports realm. It's coming. It's coming from the coast toward the center. I'm based out of the central part of the United States, and so I we're kind of seeing that, and I'm using that as an opportunity to talk to parents and organizations and other groups about in-person events being important to allow for that experience for the people that aren't actually playing the game. Help and share that.
Okay. Yeah, I think like in summary, I think a lot of what we discussed was like live events is like amazing in the sense that everyone, gets to see things for the first time. People get to meet other people, parents get to see, people what's actually going on. It's obviously a little bit more expensive between, travel costs and stuff for people and personnel and venue costs, but it's one of those things that like at the end of the season it's something a lot of people look forward to, and it's a great way to sort of like end the season and keep people interested in stuff. But yeah. So let's move on to the next topic, being organization, planning, and execution. I'm actually like really curious on sort of like, I guess like the organization aspect of this first. What sort of goes into organization? Like when I think of organization for my events, a lot of what we do is we sort of figure out our budget first, and based off our budget, then we figure out what our production team is going to look like. And whatnot. Obviously, first we have an idea of what we want our event to be, and what we're looking to do. But based off like prize pools and production and stuff, we have to have an idea of a budget. But I'm curious, like maybe an Owl or an Insomnia or Blast or even BPL, like or in Cory's audiovisual. What does it look like for you guys when you guys are like sort of organizing events?
Yeah, I'll take a
Yeah.
stab.
Sounds
I'll
good.
just briefly say, for me as a provider, I start with a 4 or 5 page sheet of a needs analysis, and I'm not producing these events at this point. I'm providing the hardware, the infrastructure, the technicians, the equipment, assisting with venues, and so logistics, a lot of logistics on our end, and so I'm asking initially a lot of questions about needs. To whoever's producing the LAN or the tournament, and so in that initial meeting, it's all about getting down to the bottom of the needs analysis and making sure that we're clear on what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I start.
Okay. Reef, you have any thoughts on this?
As for events like Blast, I don't really take part in any of the planning, but I just know it's a massive, like, I don't even want to know how much goes into it. Like the Lisbon LAN that we had in June for CSGO, one of the spring finals, was absolutely nuts. You had hundreds, probably around 100 people just working alone on the arena. There's probably still external build crews and all that. I think like organization wise, there has to be like, wouldn't be surprised if they started 1-2 years in advance as an example to plan those kind of events. It's like a lot goes into it, and then you have to get the staff and players all there, and then you have a live audience as well that you have to take care of, so yeah, quite a lot that goes into it.
Pete, any thoughts?
Yeah, I would say same thing. I've said is that a lot of it, I think, is you kind of need to establish what you're solving for with your like activation or your event. Like, what are you trying to achieve, and then syncing on your success metrics, and then figuring out like what each party is responsible with. I think the, like this how that happens varies drastically between like going from a community to like a middle ground to like a bigger production like on Owl, because there's so many stakeholders involved or so little stakeholders involved, and it's all kind of a spectrum. But I will say, I think like on the onset, it is figuring out just like what are you solving for, and how do you measure success, and then you build back from that.
Yeah, I just want to second that. I mean, for me as a PM, I really am only focused on what is the success criteria and how do I quickly get there by putting all the right equipment, personnel, training in place. So I'm not on the creative side, and that's where my brain kind of stops working, is when it gets to the creative. There's people that are for that are way better at it. I'm really just trying to figure out the end deliverable and what does that look like.
100%.
Yeah, I think the success criteria really varies, especially in esports. Like the wide range from the tiny little one person producing a stream all the way up to an arena event. There's so many like different levels that you can go to. Like we've worked on really small ones Like our community wants it kind of big, and we work on stuff with the Florida Mayhem and Misfits. And the higher you go up, you just need to plan more. You've got more people involved, more money involved. So you need more tech involved. It's just everything grows and grows and grows. And so when you're getting to filling these arenas, you need so many people. You need so many very smart people to manage these products. 'Cause otherwise, there's so many spinning plates that you're going to drop a few of them.
Okay. Yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense. So like when you're talking about planning, right? Like, what exact, like, is it just a one-person team normally, or do you have like a team of people normally planning the event? Does it start with like, maybe like, I know Synapse, you were sort of saying that you sort of lead it maybe, and you get all the entry information. Then do you go to like a team like that you're running and sort of saying, okay, guys, like this is sort of what I need for the event, and then they sort of like maybe plan some of the deliverables or whatnot, or plan the internal things. How does it sort of work after you get that information from a client?
Okay, so from a client, like the process flow for us is once we've established that we have a clear understanding of what's in it, what is the solution? What does the success criteria look like? And then at that point, it gets staffed with either our creative department, our labor department. We have heads in each of these areas, and we spend time working back and forth with the client, dialing in on a needs analysis, and basically we go through revisions. One of the things I wanted to point out a little earlier that we didn't talk about is that when planning a live in-person event IRL, sooner is better at all times. I don't know of a situation where planning starting sooner has been detrimental,
Mhm.
but there's so many details that are being mentioned here. Well, each one of those is a task in a project manager's list somewhere,
Mhm.
and so basically managing those tasks and who's supervising all of that um, is just the back end of that delivery. So
Okay.
I don't necessarily decide what gets done out there.
Mhm.
I basically try to fulfill the vision of whoever is producing that event. Like I said, I'm not produce. I did
Yeah.
produce one event in house, but we can talk about that differently or later.
Okay. Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense in terms of organization and structure, how that works. So now, like, we sort of talked about like the organization and like planning aspect, especially like the PM side of things or style of things. Is there anything else like anyone wants to add in terms of organization and planning?
Yeah, I think like I was alluding to it a bit earlier, but like I think the way I've seen most success is that you kind of have like a department, a silo, or an area that's just like you have someone who handles like the tournament, you have someone who handles like the event stuff, like the venue, you have someone who handles the production, the graphics, the marketing. And usually you have someone in that like silo that is a strong individual that has ownership of just owning that aspect and then like knowing like all right, marketing, this is what you need to, these are like what you need to do, what you need to hit. Tournament, this is what you need to do, what you need to hit. Marketing, blah blah blah. And then people tend to run off that, and as they do these events continually, it kind of becomes a process, and the team kind of understands generally what they're expected to do. And then there's like small variations between each activation or each event. But that's kind of how I've seen the most success is you have that one person in that team who is managing that specific area, and then they kind of own that and have their staff under work under them.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think the word you're looking for is accountability. For me,
Yes.
that's hardest. It's hardest, and I want to echo what was just said. That's hard to find someone who's willing to kind of own it and be accountable for it, and then be responsible for the deliverable of whatever that said um, deliverable might be.
Yeah, 100%. And I think like there's so many things going on that things will get dropped and you can't plan from the top. I think you
Right.
have to like have people in the middle planning and owning things, as you said, like with accountability, because like the head PM or like the head product manager is not going to know a very little deliverable in like graphics or marketing's back like bucket, but the person in those departments will be able to own that and make sure that stuff doesn't get dropped because they're going to be like the subject matter expert and they'll be able to help keep things going and make it the best it can be.
cool. So in terms of execution, is there anything we want to add in terms of execution? Like, it seems like a lot goes into planning, which I can totally understand. Like just thinking about like worlds, for example, like for League or like VCT, and seeing how big events those are, or even like for Overwatch, thinking about the grand finals. I can't even imagine how early planning starts and the team and like figuring out venue and all like the vendors gonna be there and then all people's in their jobs. So how does it look like for execution? I'm assuming people probably come there a bit early and whatnot and sort of plan early, or not plan, but like go there early, set up early and stuff like that.
For most events, we usually have a pretty early like call time. For Blast, as an example, their call time is like 3 to 4 hours early, just to make sure
wow.
everything's okay. Depends on the days, and usually later in the week it gets always less and less. So you can come in an hour before, as an example, just to make sure at the start of the week everything looks fine. It's different with other community events, even or whatnot, but yeah, usually I think it's once you start the stream is the most relaxing time you'll probably have, depending on your role, of course. But like that's when it started, it's going, and once you know that your production is actually running, that's when you say, okay, we're good. No issues for now. Like until something breaks down, you are pretty much set.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Easiest bit is when you're live. That's the easy bit.
Yes, exactly.
Because it's too late, man. At that point, it's done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was
Oh yeah,
Totally.
Pizza. Did you want to add something?
Oh no, I was just like gonna joke about how like my last company, like the funny thing was that we would stress out immensely up until like we would joke that like we would start our stream and then we'd cut to game after doing our opening. But once we cut to game, everything's loose. Like if something messes up, we're just like, okay, can't fix it, cool, move on to the next thing. And everyone's stress level just drops like 100%.
Exactly.
Because it's like
Mhm.
before we go live where it's fixable, everyone's super stressed. You want to make the thing the best you can. But I just remember like one of my first like kind of like I don't say wake up calls, but like I understand how the space worked where like the day before, like my producers would freak out about like information being wrong or something being different. But the day of the show, there's like, oh, it's today's show. Who cares? Just to kill it. Just drop it. We're gonna keep going. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. All right, let's do it.
Interesting.
And that's kind of just how you have to go. Like you have to roll with it. And literally for me, it's like the moment we cut to game and I see it's not lagging and it looks fine, just like the relief is gone off my shoulders.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and that makes a lot of sense. I actually never thought about it that way, but I guess it makes perfect sense when you think about like literally like soccer game or something, right? Like you focus on the training and everything you can do beforehand, but once you're actually in the game, like you've done all the training you can. It's just maybe adapting
Exactly.
or something like that. Like, but there's nothing else you can really do, right? Like you're playing now, so
Yeah. I describe it as the calm before the storm. And that's basically right before doors, usually about an hour before you let in the general public. And everybody is in places and it's a static electricity that's you can't describe it unless you've sat at front of house waiting for those doors to open. You don't know what that feels like as a producer, anybody behind the scenes, and it happens. So that feeling I can imagine happens virtually, but probably a little bit differently in person as well.
absolutely. So I'm also curious about one other topic with execution is like managing partners, relations, and sponsors and stuff. I'm assuming that's like a really big thing. It's like when I watched like League when I was at like the live event, I was noticing they had like House of Dragons, they had Red Bull, they had like a whole bunch of sponsors and stuff. And I'm assuming at like live events too, you're gonna have these sponsors maybe there selling products or being involved in some type of events and panels. So I'm assuming that also has to be organized and executed correctly. And obviously they're going to have people there. I'm curious, does normally the event pay for those sponsors to come? Like, do they pay for the travel, or do the sponsors also pay for their own travel? If anyone knows, I'm just curious about that. If anyone has experience with that.
I think I think generally the partnership is like the person who hosts the venue or pays for the venue or general T&E will cover your sponsors.
Okay.
I think. But also just to take us back to like our earlier conversation,
Mhm.
you can do everything internally and make your show amazing. But then if your sponsors, aka the people with the money, don't like it, you failed. So it's very important to like check in with your stakeholders, which is just all your sponsors, your other
Mhm.
parties that are in there, and like overall like just partners. It's like that could be even internally too. It's like you just need to make sure that you're checking with everyone on like what they mean is success and what is good for them. And especially for a sponsor, that could be drastically different than what you internally think is success.
Okay. So is that normally done by just like weekly sync ups or just sync up meetings like after stuff for ensuring like decisions that are being made are exactly what sponsors are like want and whatnot and stuff like that? And then during
Yeah, I would say it like really depends on the show. Like sometimes you are a production company putting on an event for another company. Or like a lot of production companies will put on a show for like a big esport like Overwatch or VCT. Like for most esports productions, like it's not the big like it's not the publisher producing the game, it's like another company doing it. So usually like almost everything has to go through like approvals with like the main publisher, the person paying for it, and then vice versa. Like your sponsor will want to like see graphics or like see how they're going to be shown the stream. They'll want check-ins occasionally, and usually like that is like weeklies, bunch of emails. You usually have like a PM or someone who manages partnerships to just kind of own that, keep them in the loop, and make sure that like they're being listened to, but also they have visibility on the stuff that like impacts them the most.
Okay. Anyone else have any thoughts on organization, planning, leadership, execution, and some sponsorship stuff?
I think as you get into more corporate stuff, you do realize that you're making a production for sponsors more than like esport gamers. It's interesting. It's an interesting pivot, and the dreaded approval queue and legal where you have to go through everything before you can do your fun stuff. But that's how things are sustainable. So there's nothing wrong with it.
Because it's where the money comes from in the end of the day, which ends up technically paying you. So
yeah, exactly.
So.